So in this video, I'm going to quickly go over some translation techniques. I've uploaded a Wikipedia article in Translator Toolkit because I've seen a lot of talk about how to spot a good translation, what's a good translation, but there's no real introduction into what's the actual thought process. So I've skipped forward to it's already pre-translated by machine. I've uploaded it in Translator Toolkit, and now I deleted the automatic translation. You see it again. You see the division of labor with the private partner assuming responsibility for. The original is already very verbose, so that's why I'm going to shorten it, and the machine cannot. The machine is just going to translate word. Is not word by word. The machine is smarter than that nowadays, but it's gonna just gonna include all the information, and it cannot decide which parts of information are necessary. So the aim of PPP is the division of labor you see here, which is a nominalization taken over from the German. Ziel von ÖPP ist die Arbeitsteilung. So it means it's written as a noun, and we're going to try to go for a verbal style of writing, which is just better suited for English audiences. It sounds like it's actually a big part of the native quality, which people would recognize as native sounding English. So the aim of PPP is to divide labor between, so we're not going to use all these relative clauses, which the machine translation or an unpracticed human translator would have used. The aim of PPP is to divide labor between private partners who are responsible for effizienten Erstellung. So this sounds like an effiziente Erstellung. It really sounds like it was translated from English into German. It's probably what they mean as a provision of the labor, the provision of the service. You don't create the service. The aim of PPP is to divide labor between private partners who are responsible for providing services comma, and the public sector, which ensures that social you see here in the source we had gemeinwohlorientierte Ziele. So this is, the machine picked it up pretty well. It says like common interest oriented, or you say oriented towards the common good or whatever. But we have these horrible adjectives in German, which is like a combination of Gemeinwohl, a noun, and of orientiert, which is a verb. And we're not going to just translate that. We're not going to come up with a horrible English phrase to translate that. So what we're going to say is that social goals. Why do we need objectives? It's the same thing as goals. Social goals, or aspects, or whatever. Social aspects are observed. You see, we're not going to say common interest-oriented goals. This would be really a telltale sign of a of a bad translation. If you have these words where you say, oh, this nobody would ever say that in English. This is just a word by word translation from German. So now we have the translation here. The aim of PPP is to divide labor, not the division of labor, as in the German source. The aim of PPP is to divide labor between private partners who are responsible for providing services, and the public sector, which ensures that social aspects are observed. So here again, we see that there's strained public finances. You know, a strain is often the literal translation for belastet. You see it in a lot of bad translations. So in English, you would say the burden on public finances, right? So the public sector, we can start with the subject always, and after that it gets trickier. The public sector, which in German you often say the öffentliche Hand. You know, you have to research it and find out what's the most common word in English, and usually you talk about the public sector, or you talk about the government, or whatever. The public sector this is, I really don't like this, expects the partnership with the private sector. We should divide this whole sentence anyways. For the partnership to relieve the burden on and you could just say relieve the fiscal burden in English, which is like a set phrase. You would talk about like the fiscal situation or whatever, and in German you use a more complex phrase, which is like the public finances or whatever. So we're going to turn the burden on instead of saying the burden on the public finances, we're just going to say we're going to relieve the fiscal burden. So we turned all these public finances into a single adjective, fiscal. The public sector expects the partnership, and we're not going to say the partnership with the private sector, because we already said in the previous sentence that it's that the private sector is involved. So we're not going to say here partnership with the private sector. The public sector expects the partnership to relieve the fiscal burden, since the private partner, and here we have the private partner again, so never make that mistake when they're gonna mention the private sector 2-3 times throughout the sentence. We're not going to do the same mistake. We're just going to say since the private partner partner comes up with the financing, with all or part of the financing, and must and is responsible for the project's profitability. So profitability, here we're using it as it's just not supposed to make a loss. It's not gonna, doesn't mean it has to be hugely profitable. So in in Germany, there's like a nuance to the word Wirtschaftlichkeit, which is not Rentabilität, which is like the literal translation of profitability, but in English, profit is not such a nasty word, although some people may think so, but what we mean is it's just not supposed to make a loss. We could also say like financial sustainability or whatever, but we don't need to make it overly complex. So the public sector expects the partnership to relieve the fiscal burden, since the private partner comes up with all or part of the financing and it's responsible for the project's profitability. So here, whenever we can, we're going to use a possessive s, and not going to use the of, like a preposition. Just makes it unnecessarily long. So now we've cut we cut like half a line out of the translation, which is not bad. Made it shorter, concise, because Germany just tends to be a very verbose language. So a PPP is usually similar to a rental or lease contract. Yeah, you could say that. You have to pay attention because there are because the law systems are different. Like a rent is not the same as Miete, and Pacht is not exactly the same as a lease. Like, not exactly the same, but in general usage, this is how you would translate it. But when you look into when you're translating a legal text, you might have to actually go look up the law and find out what's the actual difference. What are they referring to? But for generally speaking, if you're just saying, it's like a rental contract, makes sense to not go into detail too much. So let's skip through the. Okay, then that's it for the first part. I'm going to continue with the next paragraph in a separate video.